On February 29, 2020, in the Qatari capital of Doha, an American delegation led by Zalmay Khalilzad signed a peace agreement with the Taliban. Thus, after nearly 19 years and the death of more than 4,000 Americans and the expenditure of more than $2 trillion, the U.S. intervention in Afghanistan began to come to an end. Commenting on the signing of the deal with the Taliban, President Trump said bluntly, "We've had great success in Afghanistan, but after all these years, it's time to bring our troops home." Trump's decision was met with a positive reaction by most Americans, tired of the perpetual war waged in faraway Afghanistan. Some American analysts had a different reaction, pointing out that the withdrawal of troops from the country could mean the rapid collapse of the government in Kabul. Few expected, however, that the flag of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan would fly over the capital just over a year later, on August 14, 2021, even before America finally withdrew its last troops from the country. Welcome to the 20s Report.
Graveyard of Empires.
Afghanistan is sometimes described as the graveyard of empires, or a country that simply cannot be conquered. Now, this is not entirely true. If we look at the recent history of Afghanistan, it's clear that the British, the Soviets, and the Americans had no problems conquering the country. The problem, however, turned out to be maintaining power in the occupied areas. The British Army, which in 1839, in just a few months had seized Kabul, was driven out of the capital 3 years later and completely smashed by Afghan rebels. The Soviets, who invaded Afghanistan in 1979, were only able to hold the major urban centers under their rule, and constantly had to contend with the US-backed Mujahideen. The hardships of waging war in Afghanistan were also witnessed by the Americans. When Al-Qaeda attacked the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, America's response was decisive: an invasion of Afghanistan, where Osama bin Laden was under the protection of the Taliban. In just over a month, the Americans, in cooperation with the Northern Alliance Mujahideen, took control of all of Afghanistan. However, stabilizing the country proved to be a problem. Already in 2003, the Taliban went on the offensive, starting a guerrilla war against the coalition forces. The Americans tried to control the situation by sending more and more troops to Afghanistan. In 2010, their number exceeded 100,000, but they still could not smash the Taliban troops, who were quietly supported by some circles of power in Pakistan, especially its intelligence community. After 2011, the US military presence in Afghanistan began to become less and less popular with policymakers in Washington. Osama bin Laden was dead, there was a pro-American government in Kabul, and yet the war in Afghanistan was consuming more and more money, about $100 billion a year from 2009 to 2013. The Americans therefore decided that it was time to leave Afghanistan.
Good evening. From Bagram Air Base.
The first peace talks with the Taliban began back during the Obama administration. However, it was only under President Trump that the Americans succeeded in reaching a peace agreement with the Taliban.
Peace with an old foe.
Under the agreement, reached with the Taliban in Qatar in February of 2020, the Americans pledged to withdraw all of their troops from Afghanistan by May 1st, 2021, and to remove sanctions previously imposed on the Taliban. In return, the Taliban pledged not to attack the US or US allies and to stop members of Al-Qaeda operating inside of Afghanistan from planning further attacks targeting the United States. Even though the government in Kabul was not a party to the Qatar talks, the final agreement between the US and the Taliban still placed several important obligations on the Kabul government. First and foremost, by March 10th of 2020, the government was to release 5,000 Taliban held in Afghan prisons. In exchange, the Taliban would release 1,000 of their detainees. Following this prisoner exchange, Kabul was to begin peace negotiations with the Taliban that would lead to a final end to the conflict in the country. The deal between Washington and the Taliban was coolly received in Kabul, but Afghan politicians shied away from openly criticizing the US. The release of the 5,000 Taliban held in Afghan prisons, many of whom were experienced fighters, often holding senior positions within the Taliban movement, proved particularly problematic. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani said that he would release the prisoners, but only if the Taliban agreed to a ceasefire beforehand. Ghani wanted to use the prisoners as a bargaining chip and release them gradually as peace talks progressed. Ghani's strategy was understandable. Although the Taliban no longer attacked coalition forces, they continued to launch attacks targeting government forces. Between March and April of 2020 alone, there were 4,500 attacks on loyalist forces. In addition to the Taliban, Kabul had another problem. The echoes of last year's dispute with Afghanistan's presidential election had still not subsided. Now, officially, Ghani won the election. However, his challenger, Abdullah, claimed that there was electoral fraud and refused to recognize the election results. The deal between the US and the Taliban began to hang in the balance. Let's go ahead and look at the sequence of events over the last year and a half, which have led to the fall of Afghanistan.
March 10th, 2020.
According to the Qatar agreement, the prisoner exchange is supposed to end on this day, and peace talks between the government and the Taliban are supposed to begin. Due to Ghani's resistance, none of these things happen. The Americans, however, stand firm on the deal. Accordingly, they announce the beginning of the reduction of their contingent in Afghanistan.
March 23rd, 2020.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo lands in Kabul. He holds a series of meetings with top Afghan politicians, and he tries to end the dispute between Abdullah and Ghani and convince Kabul to release Taliban prisoners. However, these talks end in failure. Pompeo departs Kabul in the evening empty-handed. Leaving the capital, he threatens the Afghans that, if they continue to sabotage the Qatar agreement, the US will cut support to Afghanistan by $1 billion a year, or about 20%.
April 2nd, 2020.
Pompeo's threats are helping. The Afghan government is starting to release the Taliban from their prisons. However, the whole process is going very slowly. At this rate, the last batch of Taliban will not leave Afghan prisons until August.
May 17th, 2020.
The situation begins to clear up. President Ghani makes a deal with his rival Abdullah. The election rigging dispute stops, and Abdullah is appointed head of a group of negotiators who will be responsible for working out a peace deal with the Taliban.
June 18th, 2020.
The Americans now have only about 8,600 troops left in Afghanistan, down from the 13,000 present when the peace agreement with the Taliban was signed.
September 12th, 2020.
The exchange of prisoners of war has been completed several weeks prior. In Qatar, a government delegation led by Abdullah sits down for talks with the Taliban. In the months that follow, the two sides will spend hundreds of hours negotiating. Ultimately, however, they will not reach any agreement.
November 3rd, 2020.
The US presidential election is underway, and Joe Biden wins. It is not immediately clear whether he will recognize the peace agreement made with the Taliban by his predecessor. Admittedly, Biden initially praised the deal, but during the election campaign, he already claimed that perhaps America should maintain a small garrison in Afghanistan that would focus on monitoring Islamic State and Al-Qaeda activity. Meanwhile, the retreat from Afghanistan continues. By the end of November, the Americans will only have about 4,500 troops remaining in country.
December 2020.
The first clear indications are emerging that the situation in Afghanistan is heading in a worse and worse direction. AFP journalists speak to Hatullah Hayat, governor of Kandahar province, where the Taliban movement emerged in 1994. The governor speaks of a dire situation. In Kandahar province alone, government forces have surrendered 193 posts to the Taliban, mostly without a fight. The scale of desertion is enormous. Americans, however, are not concerned about the government problems in Kabul. On January 6th, a force claiming to support President Trump storms the US Capitol. America will be preoccupied with this issue for the next few weeks.
January 20th, 2021.
Joe Biden is sworn in as the 46th President of the United States. At this time, there are only about 2,500 American troops remaining in Afghanistan, the fewest since the invasion of 2001. It's still unclear whether Biden will choose to recognize the peace agreement reached with the Taliban by his predecessor, President Trump.
March 25th, 2021.
General Richard Clark, head of the U.S. Special Operations Command, testifies before a committee of the U.S. Senate. He tells senators that the Taliban are not complying with the peace agreement, and he points out that while coalition forces are no longer under attack, the Taliban are stepping up their operations against the forces loyal to the government in Kabul.
April 9th, 2021.
The U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence releases its annual report on international threats. In the section on Afghanistan, the report states that the chances of peace between the government in Kabul and the Taliban in 2021 are low. The Taliban are confident that they have the upper hand and can defeat government forces. The report also notes that government forces may have great difficulty in stopping Taliban advances once coalition troops leave Afghanistan.
April 13th, 2021.
President Joe Biden delivers an address to the nation. He decides to follow the path set by Donald Trump and honor the peace agreement with the Taliban. However, the deadline for American withdrawal from Afghanistan is pushed back from May the 1st to September 11th, 2021. After that, the deadline will be changed once more to August 31st, out of a concern for possible propaganda exploitation by jihadist movements.
May 2021.
The Taliban intensifies its operations against government forces. In its Q1 of 2021 report, the U.S. Department of Defense notes a huge increase in Taliban activity. The Americans believe that the Taliban, in defiance of the peace agreement, continue to maintain close ties with al-Qaeda and are preparing large-scale offensives targeting Afghan cities and Afghan army bases.
End of June 2021.
Since early May, the Taliban have been on the offensive, taking over more and more areas. According to estimates by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, during May and June 2021, the Taliban have occupied as many as 80 districts. A large part of the government forces surrender without a fight, leaving their bases and giving over to the Taliban military equipment supplied by the United States. Recordings of the Taliban parading with American rifles or driving Humvees are becoming increasingly popular. American analysts studying the reasons for the rapid collapse of districts indicate that it is a consequence of corruption in the Afghan armed forces, arrears in the payment of salaries, and poor coordination between pro-government forces. The rapid withdrawal of American troops, who until now have provided the Afghans with invaluable support, not only in combat, but also in intelligence, is also having a major impact. A particularly large drop in effectiveness can be seen on the side of the Afghan Air Force. Together with American soldiers, Western contractors who have so far been repairing Afghan aircraft are withdrawing from Afghanistan. Without their help, the Afghan mechanics have enormous problems with repairing modern equipment, such as Black Hawk helicopters. After the fall of Kabul, General Sami Sadat, the Afghan government commander in the Lashkargah battle, in an article for the New York Times pointed out that it was a strategic error on the part of the Americans to build the Afghan army on Western models, based on the latest equipment and technology. These proved to be worthless without the support of American specialists. This does not mean, of course, that the Afghan army gives up the fight every time. Many units do put up fierce resistance to the Taliban. The capitals of Afghan provinces are slowly turning into small islands, surrounded by a sea of Taliban. Most of the lines of communication connecting Kabul to other Afghan cities are broken. From now on, most garrisons are supplied by air, which poses a huge logistical challenge for the Afghan Air Force.
July the 5th, 2021.
Americans withdraw from Bagram Air Base, the largest U.S. military outpost in the country. The Americans leave Bagram without informing Kabul. As a result, the base falls prey to local looters, who begin to steal equipment left behind by the Americans. The Afghan army does not appear at the base until several hours later. In a statement issued later, the Americans announced that they did not warn the government in Kabul about the evacuation of Bagram due to security concerns for American forces.
July 8, 2021.
The White House holds a press conference on the situation in Afghanistan. President Joe Biden succinctly outlines the situation. When asked by a reporter if a Taliban takeover in Afghanistan is inevitable, he replies that it is not.
July 14, 2021.
Americans launch Operation Allies Refuge to evacuate former associates of the American Embassy and coalition forces, especially translators, from Afghanistan. The Americans estimate this to come to as many as 50,000 Afghans. The situation for government forces is getting worse. The fighting is already taking place in the suburbs of Herat, Lashkargah, and Kandahar, the second largest city in Afghanistan. Elite units of Afghan commandos are sent to these cities by air. However, they are unable to change the situation. At the same time, the ranks of the government troops defending the north are shrinking with each passing day. Desertions are the order of the day there. During 2 weeks in July alone, 1,500 Afghan soldiers flee to Tajikistan. Border crossings with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Iran are also falling into Taliban hands. Border guards flee to the other side of the border, and the Taliban begin collecting their own customs duties.
July 21, 2021.
General Mark Milley, chairman of the College of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, tells reporters that the Taliban already control nearly half of Afghanistan's districts. The situation is bad. Americans fear that the Taliban may soon begin storming Afghan cities.
August 2, 2021.
Fierce fighting continues for the southern cities of Herat, Lashkargah, and Kandahar. Despite air support and additional reinforcements, government forces continue to lose neighborhoods. In Lashkargah, where the 215th Afghan Army Corps is defending itself, the Taliban seize the local radio building. They soon begin broadcasting their own programs.
August 6, 2021.
The Taliban occupy the city of Zaranj, the capital of Nimruz province. It is the first provincial capital to fall into Taliban hands during this offensive.
August 7, 2021.
Another major city, Sheberghan, the capital of Jozan province, falls into Taliban hands. The government's situation becomes increasingly dire, but life in Kabul continues at a normal pace. When Sheberghan falls, President Ghani is in a meeting with the Attorney General of Afghanistan. The news of the city's collapse does not make much of an impression on him. He spends the rest of the day reading books in the garden of the presidential palace, as is his custom.
August 8, 2021.
The Taliban enter 3 more provincial capitals: Sar-e-Pol, Kunduz, and Taloqan. The American embassy in Kabul urges all U.S. citizens to leave Afghanistan immediately.
August 9, 2021.
Another city falls in the north. This time, Aibak falls into the hands of the Taliban.
August 11th, 2021.
The situation in the north is dire. After the fall of Kunduz a few days earlier, Mazar-e-Sharif remains the only major city under the control of government forces. Meanwhile, conflicting information is coming from the US. At a press briefing, White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki says that Afghan troops are capable of retaking recently lost territory. On the same day, however, the US State Department calls on its embassy staff in Kabul to destroy all confidential documents.
August 12, 2021.
In the morning, the Taliban entered the city of Ghazni, which is the southern gateway to the Afghan capital. From here, the Taliban are only about 150 kilometers away from Kabul. The pattern of fighting over the past few days is repeated here as well. The governor of Ghazni province, Daud Laghmani, surrenders the city without fighting. In return, he is escorted by the Taliban to the nearest outpost of local government forces. President Ghani has him arrested. The fall of Ghazni proves to be a turning point in the Taliban offensive. The pro-government troops, whose morale was already very low, lose all enthusiasm to fight. Now the loyalist defensive lines are crumbling like a house of cards. By the evening of August the 12th, the Taliban have captured Kandahar, Lashkargah, and Herat. At this point, it becomes clear that the fall of Kabul is only a matter of time.
August 13th, 2021.
More refugees and marauders from dismantled pro-government units are arriving in Kabul. The Americans are sending an emergency force of 3,000 troops to help evacuate American citizens from the country. The ring around the capital grows tighter and tighter, and the Taliban's advanced troops are only about 10 kilometers from the capital. Now to the east, the Taliban are pushing towards Jalalabad. If that city falls, Kabul will be encircled on all sides. President Ghani, however, does not seem to have lost faith in victory. Together with Defense Minister Bismillah Khan Mohammadi, he is inspecting the pro-government troops defending the suburbs of Kabul. At the same time, General Sami Sadat, commander of the 215th Corps, who previously fought hard against the Taliban in Lashkargah, is appointed commander-in-chief of the capital's defenses. Ghani also talks with Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. Rumors are circulating around Kabul that the Americans no longer believe that Ghani can stop the Taliban's advance. Washington is said to be pressuring Ghani to step down as president and agree to form a national unity government that would include the Taliban. On the evening of August the 14th, Mazar-e-Sharif finally falls.
August 15th, 2021.
In the morning, the Taliban enter Jalalabad. This leaves Kabul completely surrounded. The only chance to escape is the Hamid Karzai airport located in the city. However, this opportunity will soon come to an end. A few hours after the fall of Jalalabad, American soldiers take full control of the airport, stopping all civilian flights. From now on, only military planes, with American diplomats and Afghan associates of the USA, take off from the airport. At noon, the Taliban announced the suspension of their offensive towards Kabul. They announced that they have reached an agreement with the government in Kabul, and a national unity government will soon be formed that will also include the Taliban. A few hours later, however, President Ghani leaves Kabul. Initial reports suggest that he flew off to Tajikistan, but a few days later he finds himself in the United Arab Emirates. With Ghani's escape from Kabul, organized resistance by pro-government forces in Kabul ends. Talks about the formation of a national unity government also collapse. Troops of the National Army and police are disbanding and returning to their homes. No one wants to fight the Taliban anymore. In the evening, the first Taliban troops enter the capital. Thus, the history of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan comes to an end. 20 years after the overthrow of the Taliban, the white flag of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan is once again flying over the capital. And Afghanistan has turned out to be the graveyard of yet another of the great empire.
This was the 20th report. All this, however, does not mean the end of the conflict in Afghanistan. At the time of writing this script, the Panjshir Valley is still bravely defending itself. But even if the Taliban take control of the entire country, it must be remembered that it is dependent on foreign aid. So to avoid a civil war, they will have to gain access to the international financial system, which may prove more difficult than taking Kabul. As always, big thanks go to the Patreons. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.